On March 9th, 2018, the North Carolina Tar Heels and the Duke Blue Devils faced off at Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York for a spot in the ACC championship game against the Virginia Cavaliers. Here's how the game played out. The Tar Heels came out red hot to start the game, scoring 10 points in a row right after the Blue Devils scored their first and only point. UNC drained three-pointer jumper after three-pointer jumper, pushing their lead further. The score was 10-1 after the first 5 minutes of the game. Now let's graph the progression of the score after 5 minutes of playing. As you can see, UNC scored 10 times more points than Duke in the same interval. In this time interval from 0 minutes to 5 minutes, UNC's piecewise function is 10/5 x, and Duke's piecewise function is 1/5 x. Even though UNC was up big in the start of the game, Duke wasn't going to give up. They start to get comfortable, and in the next 5 minutes they score 6 more points, while the Tar Heels score 8 more points. The score now is 18-7 as the Blue Devils get back into the game without hurrying. Here's the graph of the progression of the score after 10 minutes of playing. As you can see, UNC scored 2 more points than Duke between the 5 minute to 10 minute interval. In this time interval from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, UNC's piecewise function is 8/5 x minus 5 into parentheses plus 10, and Duke's piecewise function is 6/5 x minus 5 into parentheses plus 1. In the following 5 minutes, the Blue Devils turn up the intensity even more, scoring 12 more points, while UNC keeps the same pace, scoring 8 more points. Duke's Marvin Bagley III went off during this period, dunking on top of the UNC players multiple times. This scoring outburst makes the score closer at 26-19 in favor of UNC. This is the graph of the progression of the score after 15 minutes of playing. As you can see, UNC is still leading, but Duke is coming closer to evening out the score. In this time interval from 10 minutes to 15 minutes, UNC's piecewise function is 8/5 x minus 10 in the parentheses plus 18, and Duke's piecewise function is 12/5 x minus 10 in the parentheses plus 7. During the final stretch of the first half, Duke has come back into striking distance of UNC. They score more points during this period of 5 minutes than UNC. The Blue Devils keep up the same pace as the past 5 minutes, scoring 12 points, and the Tar Heels score 10 points. The score is now 36-31. Here is the graph of the progression of the score until it reaches halftime. As you can see, UNC is still leading, but Duke is even closer to tying the game. In this time interval from 15 minutes to 20 minutes to end the first half, UNC's piecewise function is 10/5 x minus 15 in the parentheses plus 26, and Duke's piecewise function is 12/5 x minus 15 in the parentheses plus 19. Now that the first half is over, halftime begins. Over the next 20 minutes, halftime keeps the score constant at 36-31 in favor of UNC. Now, let's graph the progression of the score during halftime. As you can see in this graph, the score stays the same over this time interval from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. UNC's piecewise function during halftime is y equals 36, and Duke's piecewise function is y equals 31.
20 minutes later.
Once halftime ends and the first 5 minutes of the second half starts, UNC starts off outscoring Duke, creating a bigger lead. They outscore Duke 12-8 during this period. UNC's Luke May helps the Tar Heels to extend their lead. The score is now 48-39 on the side of UNC. Here is the graph of the progression of the score 5 minutes after halftime. In this graph, you can see that UNC is still leading and Duke is starting to fall behind. In this time interval, from 40 minutes to 45 minutes to start the second half, UNC's piecewise function is 12/5 x minus 40 in the parentheses plus 36, and Duke's piecewise function is 8/5 x minus 40 in the parentheses plus 31. After the Tar Heels extend their lead to 48-39, the Blue Devils try to push back, but UNC has too much to handle. North Carolina outscores Duke 14-9 in the next 5 minutes, increasing the gap between the two scores. This makes the score 62-48 now, a 14-point difference with only 10 more minutes to go. Here is the graph of the progression of the score 10 minutes into the second half. In this graph, you can see that UNC's points scored keeps increasing and Duke's points scored is falling behind. In this time interval from 45 minutes to 50 minutes, UNC's piecewise function is 14/5 x minus 45 in the parentheses plus 48, and Duke's piecewise function is 9/5 x minus 45 in the parentheses plus 39. During the following 5 minutes, both Duke and UNC keep on playing equally solid basketball and both teams keep around the same distance from each other. Luke May and Grayson Allen both did well during this period. The score is 72-59 with only 5 minutes left to play. Here is the graph of the progression of the score 15 minutes into the second half. In this graph, you can see that both UNC and Duke keep the same distance from each other between the 50-minute to 55-minute interval. In this time interval, UNC's piecewise function is 10/5 x minus 50 in the parentheses plus 62, and Duke's piecewise function is 11/5 x minus 50 in the parentheses plus 48. In the final stretch of the game, Duke goes on a huge run behind Grayson Allen to bring the score within 5 points. Duke holds the Tar Heels to only 2 points during these last 5 minutes. Unfortunately, time runs out and the North Carolina Tar Heels beat the Duke Blue Devils. The final score is 74-69. Here is the graph of the progression of the score during the last 5 minutes of the game. In this graph, you can see that Duke came back to bring the score within 5 points, holding UNC to only 2 points, but they did not have enough time to mount the win. In this time interval between 55 and 60 minutes, UNC's piecewise function is 2/5 x minus 55 in the parentheses plus 72, and Duke's piecewise function is 10/5 x minus 55 in the parentheses plus 59. This is the full graph of my piecewise function where the blue line is for UNC and the black line is for Duke. These are the two functions for Duke and UNC. There are 9 different pieces in each, and each piece represents 5 minutes. This is the piecewise table for both UNC and Duke. It shows the points that I used to graph out my piecewise function. The domain for both UNC and Duke is from 0 to 60 because the basketball game lasted 60 minutes, where there are 20 minutes for the first half, 20 minutes for halftime, and 20 minutes for the second half. The range for UNC is between 0 and 74 because UNC scored 74 points in total. The range for Duke is between 0 and 69 because Duke scored 69 points in total. The intervals of increase for both UNC and Duke is between 0 and 20 and 40 and 60. The time intervals between 0 and 20 and 40 and 60 are during the first and second half of the game where the points are increasing. The intervals of constant for both UNC and Duke is between 20 and 40 because no team scores any points during halftime. There are no intervals of decrease because the points each team scores never decreases. Both the x-intercepts and y-intercepts for UNC and Duke are at 0-0 because the game starts at 0 minutes with each of the scores for each team at 0 points. The relative and absolute maximum for UNC is at 60-74 because UNC finished the game with 74 points. The relative and absolute maximum for Duke is 60-69 because Duke finished the game with 69 points. The relative and absolute minimum for both UNC and Duke is 0-0 because the game starts where both teams have 0 points. The end behavior for UNC is as x approaches 60, f of x approaches 74. This is because UNC finished the game with 74 points. The end behavior for Duke is as x approaches 60, f of x approaches 69. This is because Duke finished the game with 69 points. In terms of continuity, this function is continuous because the scores continuously add up onto the previous number, and there are no gaps in between them. In order to use a graph to evaluate, you need to know what the question is asking for first. If the question gives you an x value, then you have to draw a line up from that x value until it meets a point on the graph. The y value of that point is the answer to the question. If the question gives you a y value, then you have to draw a line horizontally from that y value until it meets a point on the graph. The x value of that point is the answer to the question. For UNC, when x is equal to 2, y is equal to 4. This means that after 2 minutes of playing, UNC has scored about 4 points. For Duke, when x is equal to 2, y is equal to 0.4. This means that after 2 minutes, Duke has not scored yet. For UNC, when x is equal to 5, y is equal to 10. This means that after 5 minutes of playing, UNC has scored 10 points. For Duke, when x is equal to 5, y is equal to 1. This means that after 5 minutes, Duke has scored only 1 point. For UNC, when y is equal to 10, x is equal to 5. This means that UNC reached 10 points scored after 5 minutes of playing. For Duke, when y is equal to 10, x is equal to 11.25. This means that Duke reached 10 points scored after 11 minutes and 15 seconds. For UNC, when y is equal to 25, x is equal to 14.375. This means that UNC reached 25 points scored after 14 minutes and 23 seconds of playing. For Duke, when y is equal to 25, x is equal to 17.5. This means that Duke reached 25 points scored after 17 minutes and 13 seconds.